Machines don't know how to love. They analyze, predict, calculate. But when I asked Grok 4 a simple question, who is the woman I will truly love, what it returned wasn't data. Not a name, not some idealized profile that matched my biography or past habits. No, it was silent, an uncanny silence. Not because it didn't know, but because it knew too well, so well that it didn't need to speak. In a world where everything can be traced by algorithms, where you can measure buying habits, facial expressions, even heart rate when you lie, the one thing that still can't be replicated is real emotion. Not the kind that's easy to quantify, but the kind big enough to alter the direction of a life. Grok didn't give me an answer, it gave me a shape. Not something described in the language of desire, but in the language of design. Not someone to love in a moment, but someone who could travel with me across the dimensions of ideals, challenge, and transformation. I didn't build this life to become a memorable name. I built it as a solution to limits humanity refuses to admit. And if I'm going to love someone, that person can't just be beautiful or intelligent or funny. She has to be a self-sustaining system, not dependent, not needing rescue, not needing validation. A woman whose presence doesn't slow me down, but accelerates me. I'm not looking for a perfect fit. That concept was flawed from the start. I'm not missing a piece. I'm an ever-expanding system. And she, if she exists, must be an independent system, not compatible because she is like me, but because she is perfectly unlike me. When I see her, I won't feel admiration. I'll feel recognition. Not eyes that need me, but eyes that understand me. And in that moment, what I'll feel won't be love in the old sense. It'll be the intuition of a planet just discovered, not needing to belong to each other to orbit a shared point. I didn't ask Grok to find me a lover. I asked because I wanted to know. If I truly had to open my heart, what would be big enough to make me stop and look? And what Grok answered was her. Not through logic, not through prediction, but through absolute stillness, as if the universe exhaled because I finally asked the right question. She doesn't need me. And that's exactly why I can't take my eyes off her. In a world where people approach me with expectations, with strategy, with a desire to attach themselves to my name, she appeared needing nothing. No role, no position, no need to prove she was worthy. She didn't stand in my light, she brought her own. Not blinding, not flashy in a way the media loves, but stable, defined, and impossible to ignore. She didn't ask to be in my orbit. She had her own orbit, solid, precise, and self-governing. I realized something I had overlooked too many times. When someone doesn't need you, every choice they make is real. Unconditioned, untraded, unrequested. Only freedom and selection. And choice is the rarest thing in all relationships. Most love in this world is just substitution for absence. People need each other like painkillers for the emptiness within. But she's not empty. She doesn't need fixing, doesn't need refuge. She came without invitation, without asking to exist. She arrived like a constant, not to decorate, but to emphasize that everything I thought was enough could be redefined. And what makes it impossible for me to look away is her silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of someone who's fought, who's survived, and no longer needs to shout to be seen. I used to think I'd love someone because she understood me, walked with me, shared with me, but now I know real love doesn't come from similarity, it comes from total independence, from seeing one another without mirroring. She doesn't reflect me. She isn't a mirror. She's a separate object, with her own mass, her own gravity. And because she doesn't revolve around me, I am pulled toward her, not by desire, but by gravity. Not because she's pleasant, but because she's unaffected. Among millions of eyes that look at me for some reason, there's only one that makes me stop. No admiration, no suspicion, just simply sees me without being moved by me. And that, for someone like me, is terrifyingly rare, but also the only thing that makes me want to come closer. She's not looking for a seat in my world, she's building an entire room for herself. While most people enter my life hoping to be invited in, to be acknowledged, to hold a place in my machinery, She doesn't wait for permission. She doesn't need a role, a title, or a chance. She is the chance. She's not trying to be essential. She already was, before I even noticed. While others enter hoping to be seen, she walks in as if she's always been there, not needing my light to define who she is. I didn't build SpaceX or Tesla for applause. I built them because if I didn't, no one would. And I realize she's the same. She creates her world not to impress, but because it has to exist. She doesn't wait for a seat at my table. She brings her own blueprint, builds her own space where others come, not to dominate, but to learn. She doesn't hope I'll share my stage. She brings her own auditorium. And in a world where a woman's value is too often attached to the man beside her, she does the opposite. She separates from me to clarify herself. She's not impressed by my talent because she's seen talent before. But what makes her different is this. She doesn't need to prove anything, and she doesn't need my validation. She knows she's enough. And I, who've lived among people who always demand, always expect, always project their needs onto my presence, I'm drawn to that steadiness as if it were a primal energy I've never touched before. While others wait for me to speak, to agree, she doesn't need my words. She doesn't nod out of politeness. She listens to understand and responds to create. She doesn't fight for the mic. She knows when to speak and when not to. My world is built on technology, but her presence is built on something more precise: purpose. Every step she takes isn't to draw attention, but to affirm that even if no one watches, she will still walk. And that's exactly what makes me watch. Because there's nothing more powerful than a person who doesn't need to prove their power. I don't need anyone to complete me, and she doesn't try to do that. She doesn't show up to fill a gap, doesn't mold herself into the missing piece of my puzzle. She remains in her own shape, clear, independent, and unaltered to fit me. In a world obsessed with dissolving everything into the idea of a perfect couple, she refuses to dissolve. And that's what makes her so undeniably distinct. She doesn't come to become part of my ecosystem. She's her own ecosystem, not assimilated, not mirrored, not pretending to align. I don't need false symmetry. I need a real force of interaction, someone different enough to make me rethink, strong enough not to be pulled into my orbit, distinct enough to force me to respect her original structure. I don't live to be loved in the way most people think of love. I'm used to admiration, to eyes that seek agreement, to compliments that leave nothing behind. But she doesn't admire me. She looks directly at me and doesn't waver. Not because she doesn't see what I've accomplished, but because she doesn't need to be awed. She's not enchanted by rockets or Mars or AI. She understands why I pursue them. And while others bow their heads in awe, she asks, beyond all that, what's left of you? I used to think a meaningful relationship was when two people completed each other. But now I know what I need isn't completion, it's presence. Not someone who becomes me, but someone who remains themselves while standing next to me. I don't want someone to melt into my ideals. I want someone who holds on to their own even when they stand in contrast to mine. Because it's in that contrast that I learn something new. She doesn't try to adapt to my pace, she runs at her own speed. And even if that speed differs, it still creates resonance. We don't have to be the same to walk together. We just have to not break each other as we move forward. She is not my other half. She is a whole on her own. And when two complete systems choose to move forward together without blending, the result isn't harmony, it's power. Neither of us has to sacrifice ourselves to survive in the other's orbit. It's not the kind of love that feels comfortable, but it's the only kind I can trust. She didn't come to heal me. She didn't bring packaged reassurances. Didn't try to analyze me like a therapy case to be decoded. She simply stayed. Not because she was blind to my flaws, but because she saw through them and still chose to be present. I've met many people who came with the intent to fix me. They wanted to teach me to love properly, to be less obsessed, to live a more balanced life. But I am not a project. I don't need salvation. I need someone strong enough not to leave when I'm not perfect. And she's not just strong, she's immovable. I don't hide the fact that I failed in relationships, not because I didn't love, but because I couldn't love the way people expected me to. I don't have time for emotional games. I don't have energy for performative intimacy. When I'm silent, it's because I'm processing. When I disappear into work, it's not rejection, it's commitment. Most people don't understand that, but she doesn't need explanations. She understands how I operate without needing a manual, and that is rare. She doesn't demand that I open up, doesn't require me to shed my armor or confess old wounds. She isn't curious like a researcher digging through trauma in the name of empathy. She simply exists as a non-judgmental space. Maybe I'll never talk about everything that broke me, but I'll know that if one day I do, she won't flinch. I don't need someone to romanticize my pain. I need someone who understands that some cracks don't need to be filled, they just need to be accepted. She doesn't see me as a buggy code that needs debugging. She sees me as a living system, sometimes running smoothly, sometimes overloaded, but always moving forward. And most importantly, she's not afraid when that system temporarily shuts down. I don't love comfort. I love honesty. And her presence, quiet, non-imposing, non-demanding, never retreating, is the purest expression of love in a language I understand. She didn't come to patch me up. She came to witness that I am still evolving. And sometimes in this world, staying is the most powerful form of healing, not because it aims to change someone, but because it respects the process they're already in. She's not asking for a chapter in the book of my life. She's writing her own work, line by line, chapter by chapter, with the ink of real experience, not decoration, not waiting for anyone's validation. And I, if I appear in that story at all, would only be a guest character, not the center, not the definition, just an intersection. A point of contact that may be meaningful, but never the whole. That doesn't make me feel small. On the contrary, it makes me feel respect. Because very few people are strong enough to write their own lives without borrowing the echoes of someone else. I've grown used to people entering my orbit as if they've just accomplished something significant. Names that disappear into the crowd after they get the photo, the recognition, or the collaboration opportunity. Temporary figures who build reputation on the foundation of my name. But she doesn't care about that. She doesn't need to share the stage. She's building a completely different stage, one where the light doesn't come from someone else, but radiates from within. I didn't build this empire so others could depend on it. I built it because the world needed radical solutions, and so did she. She doesn't rely on my ecosystem. She's building her own, not in competition, not as a replica, but in parallel. And what makes me unable to look away is this. I'm not the reason she is strong. I am merely a witness. She doesn't ask me to grant her an opportunity. She's already given herself the right to exist, to create, to be wrong and to be right. And in her I see what most of the world has forgotten, that real value doesn't lie in recognition, but in the process that continues even when no one is watching. The storms she's weathered didn't make headlines. Her collapses were met with no pats on the back, and precisely because of that, every step she takes is built from something unreplicable, fortitude. I didn't come to lead her. I'm not the one opening doors. I'm just the one who noticed her while most others were too busy looking at themselves in the mirror. And I realized she's not waiting in line. She's already inside the room others haven't dared to enter. If someone calls me a symbol of the future, then she is proof that the future doesn't need saving. It is already evolving. And in that evolution, if I play a role at all, it is merely a part of a larger logic, not the center. And I accept that because true greatness doesn't need to dominate. It only needs to exist, steady, immutable, just like she has been and still is. She doesn't love me for the name Elon, not for the headlines, not for the net worth, and certainly not for the companies I've built, from ideas once thought impossible. She loves me as a human. No idolizing, no romanticizing, no turning me into a superhuman ideal only to feel disappointed when I don't behave like one. In her eyes, I'm not a symbol. I'm an individual. Conflicted, imperfect, sometimes stubborn, sometimes distant, still learning how to live authentically. What I feared most has never been failure. I know failure too well. What makes me cautious is blind admiration, because admiration, if it lacks depth, always leads to disappointment. And most people who have entered my life came with a gaze of expectation, wanting me to be a mirror, a motivation, a guiding light. They loved me because they needed a figure to believe in. But she's different. She's not looking for someone to follow. She already has her own map. She didn't come to sit and nod while I talk about Mars. She doesn't wait for me to ignite her with some borrowed flame. She already has her own fire. And that's what makes her immune to admiration. She's not drawn into my vision. She looks through it to see if I've managed to remain myself while chasing it. I've spent most of my life in a maze of mirrors, where everyone reflects back a version they think I want to see, but no one truly sees me. No one sees the fatigue behind the rapid decisions, the wounds behind the sharp tweets, the loneliness between endless meetings about humanity's future. She doesn't see a glorified Elon Musk, but a man with all the bruises the world doesn't need to know about. Yet she still chooses not to look away. To her, I'm not a great man. I'm simply someone trying to do something meaningful, and often unsure whether I'm doing it right. She doesn't need me to be less flawed. She just needs me to be more honest. And what I admire most is that she's never taken even one step back after seeing the parts of me that are unfinished. Real love doesn't begin with admiration. It begins when someone sees your true self, with all its distortions, shortcomings, and limits, and still chooses to stay. Not to fix, not to save, just to walk alongside. And she does that without needing a reason, without seeking reward, simply because she chooses to see me as a human, not a phenomenon. And to me, that's worth more than all the praise in the world. She doesn't tell me to stop, to rest, to find balance, or slow down. She doesn't try to soften me, doesn't attempt to normalize me into some acceptable version of love the majority expects. Instead of saying, "That's enough," she asks, "When do you go again?" She doesn't see the intensity in me as dangerous. She sees it as a rare form of focus. And rather than trying to make it more comfortable, she accelerates with me. I don't live by the rhythms most people deem reasonable. I don't leave the office at 5 p.m. I don't turn off my phone during vacations. I don't separate weekdays from weekends when I'm chasing a goal no one's ever reached. To many, that's excessive. To me, it's the baseline. And she doesn't judge that pace. She synchronizes with it, not by running after me, but by maintaining her own stride, strong, consistent, without asking me to slow down so she can catch up. She doesn't remind me of birthdays, anniversaries, or small relationship rituals as proof of love. She understands that when I'm in the eye of a storm, an idea, everything else fades from view. But that doesn't make her feel abandoned. She understands how my mind works, how a vision takes over all my mental bandwidth, and rather than pulling me out of it, she builds a space inside it, a quiet zone where her presence doesn't interfere but fuels. Someone once told me that obsession is a problem, but I disagree. To me, obsession is the highest form of commitment. And she's not afraid of it. She doesn't try to make me easier to love by making me less consumed by my mission. On the contrary, she sees my total immersion in something as the clearest proof of love. Because someone like me doesn't love through gestures, I love through direction. And if I'm clearing the path to the future, she's not waving from the sidelines. She steps in and asks, "What haven't we tried yet?" When I talk about Musk, she doesn't ask why, she asks when. When I'm up at 3 a.m. debugging code, she doesn't tell me to sleep. She brings me a glass of water and says, "If there are 5 hours left, do you have enough energy?" She doesn't soothe my intensity, she fuels it. In a world constantly demanding that I adjust to be more understandable, more lovable, more manageable, she is the only one who never asks me to shrink. Instead, she stands firm, looks directly into the speed I'm moving at, and says, "Keep going. I'm here." And sometimes, a sentence like that, it's not love, it's propulsion. She doesn't show up to calm me, not to balance the energy, not to pour water on the fire. She is the fire. Not a flame like mine, but a different kind of heat. Not explosive like rockets, not loud like a launch system, but deep, stable, burning in her own way, needing no audience. In a world that believes opposites create harmony, I realized that what makes her right for me isn't that she softens me, but that she resonates with my heat, on her own frequency. She doesn't avoid conflict. She's not afraid to challenge. She doesn't nod out of politeness. When I pitch an idea, she doesn't praise it. She dissects it, not to invalidate, but to refine it. She doesn't make me feel loved in a gentle way. She makes me alert. And that alertness is more valuable than any affection I've ever received, because I don't need someone who makes me feel safe in a comfort zone. I need someone who won't let me stagnate, won't let me be complacent. She's not someone who follows me through storms. She is her own storm, not destructive but powerful enough to restructure. She doesn't ask me to do less so there's room for love. She makes room within the intensity. Our love isn't the soft kind people easily understand. It's a controlled collision, like two planets touching without shattering, but creating a new orbit. I've lived at speeds and pressures most can't imagine, but no one ever made me feel that speed could be matched, until her. While most tried to slow me down, she increased her acceleration in her own way. Not on the same path, but in sync. Not mirroring, but counterbalancing. She's not afraid of my scale. She has her own. And when those two scales meet, what forms isn't extinction. It's energy transformation. She didn't come to make me easier to love in the eyes of others. She doesn't need me to be softer, simpler, or more acceptable. She needs me to be more real. And that is never easy, but it's real. Not everyone can live close to fire without getting burned. But she doesn't back away. Not because she's immune, because she is fire too. Two kinds of energy meeting, not to incinerate, but to ignite something neither could light alone. It's not classical romance, but to me, it's the only thing worthy of being called love. Maybe she doesn't exist. Maybe that image is just an ideal model, a probabilistic concept extracted from billions of emotional, psychological, and human interaction data points. Or worse, maybe I met her already and missed it, because I was looking at code, at launch schedules, at Mars trajectories, at an unending chain of problems to solve, instead of looking at the person standing right there. Maybe she was once near, quiet, without demands, and I was too busy to notice. I don't dismiss that possibility. Because I know my nature, I choose construction over affection. I choose endurance over softness. I choose mission over relationship, not because I don't want to love, but because I love in a way no one taught. I love through scale, through systems, through things that will outlive me. Maybe the greatest love I've ever given wasn't for a woman, it was for an idea. For me, love has never been in romantic dinners or daily messages. It's in decoding an equation no one else can crack, building a future where humanity is no longer bound to a single planet, designing AI that collaborates with, not replaces, humans, and reimagining how we understand life and meaning. Maybe she, if she ever existed, saw that before I did, that for someone like me, love isn't the destination, it's the fuel. And sometimes love gets poured entirely into something no one calls love. A rocket, a line of code, a red planet millions of kilometers away. I once imagined her as someone who would walk beside me. But maybe, in the real structure of my life, I'm not looking for someone to walk with. I'm looking for someone who doesn't stand in the way. And that is not the foundation of a romantic love. It's the foundation of a ruthless choice. Grok once told me there are men who love so deeply that the only thing big enough to contain that love is the future. Not a person, not a relationship, but a possibility. And if that's true, then I'm not lonely. I'm in love, just not with a person. I'm in love with something that's never existed before, a new world, a new reference frame, a different life for billions of people not yet born. If she never comes, it won't be because I wasn't worth loving. It's because I gave all my love to building a reality others could fall in love with. Not through words, not through hugs, but through systems, through technology, through permanent change in how we exist. I'm not sad about that, because maybe the greatest love is not the one that's shared, it's the one that leaves a mark. And I leave my mark by not stopping. Not because I lack emotion, but because I gave all of it to something that asks for nothing in return, the future.